have no idea what Lauren's been telling everyone at the club," my best friend Maya whispered urgently across our corner table at Serenity Café, her manicured fingers gripping her ceramic mug so tightly I thought it might shatter. "She's spreading it around that you've been completely written out of your grandmother's will, that you had some massive falling out with your parents and they convinced the estate lawyer to cut you off entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The words hit me like ice water. I nearly choked on my cappuccino, the foam suddenly tasting bitter on my tongue. My sister Lauren was saying, "What now?" I stared at Maya, searching her expression for any hint that this was some kind of cruel joke, but her dark eyes held nothing but concern and barely contained outrage. "She's telling people what exactly?" I managed, setting down my cup with trembling hands. Maya leaned closer, lowering her voice even though we were tucked away in the quietest corner of the cafe. "According to what I heard from Jessica, who got it straight from Lauren herself at yesterday's charity luncheon, you've been completely disinherited. She's saying that Grandmother Vivian was so disappointed in your life choices that she had her will rewritten to exclude you entirely." Before we dive deeper into this unbelievable story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today, and if you're finding this as shocking as I did when it happened to me, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I have an even more incredible story about family secrets that will absolutely blow your mind. My name is Sophia Chen Martinez, and at 28 years old, I thought I knew everything there was to know about my family's dynamics. I was wrong. Dead wrong. What happened next would not only expose the truth about my sister's desperate schemes, but reveal a family secret so profound it would change everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and what it truly means to honor someone's legacy. Growing up as the youngest daughter in the prestigious Chen Martinez family of Monterey Bay, California, came with expectations that felt as heavy as the coastal fog that rolled in each evening. Our family had built their fortune through 3 generations of innovative marine technology, starting with my great-grandfather's small fishing boat repair shop and evolving into Chen Martinez Maritime Solutions, one of the most respected marine engineering firms on the West Coast. From the outside, we appeared to be the epitome of the American dream realized. Our sprawling estate overlooked the Pacific Ocean, complete with its own private dock where my late grandfather's restored 1960s yacht still bobbed gently in the harbor. Inside our home, original artwork from local galleries lined the walls, and fresh flowers from our meticulously maintained gardens graced every room. We were the family that other families pointed to as an example of what hard work and determination could achieve. But like many families that seem perfect from the outside, ours had fault lines that ran deep beneath the polished surface. My older sister Lauren had always been the golden child, the one who seemed to effortlessly embody everything our parents valued. At 32, she was stunningly beautiful in that effortless California way, with sun-streaked blonde hair that always looked perfectly tousled, and a smile that could charm anyone from the local barista to Fortune 500 CEOs. She had married her college sweetheart, Marcus Rothwell, right after graduation, and they'd settled into a lifestyle that looked like it belonged in a luxury magazine. Their Pebble Beach mansion was a testament to their success, or at least their commitment to appearing successful. Lauren had never held a traditional job, instead dedicating herself to what she called lifestyle curation and social impact. This translated to organizing charity galas, serving on the boards of various cultural institutions, and maintaining the kind of social calendar that required a full-time assistant to coordinate. Marcus worked in investment banking, pulling in a salary that should have supported their lavish lifestyle comfortably. Should have being the operative phrase. Because despite his substantial income, Lauren's spending habits had a way of making even significant earnings seem insufficient. The designer clothes, the luxury cars, the frequent trips to Europe and Asia, the private school tuition for their twin daughters, it all added up to a lifestyle that perpetually teetered on the edge of financial strain. My brother David had found his own path as a marine biologist, following in our grandfather's footsteps by dedicating his life to understanding and protecting the ocean that had given our family so much. At 30, he was quietly brilliant, the kind of person who could spend hours discussing the mating habits of sea otters or the migration patterns of gray whales with genuine enthusiasm. He lived modestly in a cottage near the Monterey Bay Aquarium, where he worked as a senior researcher and seemed genuinely content with his choice to prioritize passion over profit. Then there was me, the youngest, the one who had somehow ended up being different from both my siblings in ways that created constant underlying tension. Instead of following the expected path of early marriage and settling into Monterey's social elite, I had pursued my education relentlessly. I'd earned my master's degree in sustainable business development and had spent the last 5 years building a consulting firm that helped coastal communities develop environmentally responsible tourism initiatives. My work took me all over California and beyond, from the redwood forests of Humboldt County to the desert communities of Southern California. I loved the challenge of finding innovative solutions that balanced economic growth with environmental protection. But my nomadic lifestyle and unconventional career choices had always been a source of subtle disapproval from certain family members. I lived in a converted loft in Carmel's Arts District, drove a hybrid vehicle that was practical rather than prestigious, and had been in a committed relationship with Elena Rodriguez, a brilliant environmental lawyer, for the past 3 years. Elena and I had met at a conference on sustainable coastal development, and our relationship had grown from shared professional interests into something deep and meaningful. But my parents still introduced Elena as my friend at family gatherings, and Lauren had never bothered to remember her name correctly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The family dynamics had always been complicated, but they'd become increasingly strained since our grandmother Vivian's health had begun declining over the past year. Vivian Chen Martinez was the undisputed matriarch of our family, a woman who had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1950s and had worked alongside my grandfather to build the business from nothing into the empire it became today. Grandmother Vivian was sharp, elegant, and utterly formidable even at 86. She had been the one to insist that the family business incorporate sustainable practices decades before environmental responsibility became fashionable. She spoke 5 languages fluently, maintained correspondence with marine researchers around the world, and had never met a challenge she couldn't face head-on. But more than her professional accomplishments, Grandmother Vivian was known for her unwavering principles. She believed in hard work, integrity, and giving back to the community that had embraced our family. She had established multiple scholarship funds for first-generation college students, funded marine conservation research, and quietly supported dozens of local families through difficult times. Her generosity was legendary, but it was always purposeful, always aimed at creating positive change rather than simply writing checks. The inheritance everyone was whispering about centered around Grandmother Vivian's personal estate, which was separate from the family business. Over the decades, she had accumulated significant wealth through careful investments and real estate acquisitions throughout the Monterey Peninsula. There was also her extensive art collection, jewelry that had been in the family for generations, and the Pacific Vista Estate, the original family home where she still lived, which commanded some of the most spectacular ocean views on the entire Central Coast. For months leading up to Maya's shocking revelation, there had been subtle signs that something was shifting in our family dynamics. Lauren had been visiting Grandmother Vivian more frequently, often bringing the twins and staying for elaborate Sunday dinners that seemed to exclude David and me. When I asked my parents about it, they'd brushed off my concerns, saying that Lauren was simply being thoughtful about spending time with her grandmother while she was still able to enjoy her great-grandchildren. But there had been other signs, too. Lauren had seemed unusually interested in Grandmother Vivian's daily routine, asking detailed questions about her medications, her legal appointments, and her meetings with the family attorney. She'd also begun making comments about how difficult it must be for someone of grandmother Vivian's generation to understand modern family structures and contemporary lifestyle choices. These comments had initially seemed like Lauren's typical self-absorption, but now, sitting in Serenity Café with Maya's words ringing in my ears, they took on a more sinister significance. Had Lauren been systematically working to undermine my relationship with our grandmother? Had she been planting seeds of doubt about my choices, my relationship with Elena, my career path? What exactly did Lauren tell Jessica? I asked Maya, trying to keep my voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside me. Maya glanced around the cafe nervously before responding. She said that grandmother Vivian had become increasingly concerned about your lifestyle choices over the past year. According to Lauren's version, your grandmother was particularly troubled by your relationship with Elena and your decision to prioritize your career over settling down and starting a family. The accusation felt like a physical blow. Grandmother. Vivian had always been supportive of my career, often asking detailed questions about my projects and expressing pride in my work. And while she had never explicitly discussed my relationship with Elena, she had always been gracious and welcoming. Whenever Elena accompanied me to family gatherings, Lauren claimed, Maya continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, that grandmother Vivian felt you had rejected traditional family values and that she couldn't in good conscience leave her life's work to someone who didn't share her commitment to family legacy. I felt my hands clench into fists beneath the table. The irony was almost too much to bear. I was the one who had chosen to build a career that aligned with grandmother Vivian's environmental values. I was the one who regularly visited her, not to discuss inheritance or financial matters, but to listen to her stories about building the business and navigating the challenges of being an immigrant woman in 1950s America. I was the one who had spent countless hours helping her digitize her correspondence with marine researchers and organize her extensive collection of environmental research papers. There's more, Maya said reluctantly. Lauren also suggested that your parents had supported grandmother Vivian's decision to revise her will. She implied that they were concerned about your judgment and worried that leaving you a significant inheritance would only enable what they saw as irresponsible life choices. This latest revelation hit me like a rogue wave. My parents and I had certainly had our differences over the years, particularly regarding my relationship with Elena and my unconventional career path. But the idea that they would actively work to have me disinherited seemed impossible to believe. My father, Dr. James Martinez, was a respected marine veterinarian who had always encouraged all his children to pursue their passions. My mother, Linda Chen Martinez, was a retired professor of environmental science who had been instrumental in developing sustainable practices for the family business. Surely they wouldn't support such a drastic action based on their disapproval of my personal choices. Would they? Maya, I said carefully, how widely has Lauren been spreading this story? My best friend's expression grew even more troubled. That's what I'm worried about, Soph. This wasn't just casual gossip. Lauren made these statements at the Monterey Peninsula Women's Charity Luncheon yesterday. There were at least 50 women there, including several family friends and business associates. She presented it as though it was already a done deal, as if the will had already been revised and the matter was settled. The calculated nature of Lauren's actions was becoming clear. She hadn't simply spread malicious gossip. She had made a public announcement designed to humiliate me and establish a narrative that would be difficult to challenge. By presenting the disinheritance as a fait accompli, she was effectively daring me to contradict her publicly, which would only draw more attention to the family drama. I thought about the implications of Lauren's strategy. If enough people believed that I had been disinherited due to my lifestyle choices, it would not only damage my personal reputation, but could potentially impact my business as well. Many of my clients were community leaders and environmental Organizations that valued both professional competence and personal integrity. If they believed that my own family had rejected me due to questions about my character, it could undermine their confidence in my work. "I need to talk to Grandmother Vivian directly," I said, pulling out my phone to check the time. "This is insane, Maya. There's no way she would make such a decision without at least discussing it with me first." Maya reached across the table to place her hand over mine. "Sophia, you need to be careful about how you approach this. If Lauren has been working on this for months, if she's been systematically influencing your grandmother's opinion of you, confronting her directly might backfire." The wisdom in Maya's advice was undeniable, but the urgency I felt to clear my name and understand what was really happening made patience feel impossible. I had always prided myself on facing problems head-on, on addressing conflicts with honesty and direct communication. The idea of tiptoeing around my own family, of treating my relationship with my grandmother like a delicate political negotiation, felt foreign and wrong. But Maya was right. If Lauren had indeed been manipulating the situation for months, if she had been carefully crafting a narrative that painted me as ungrateful and irresponsible, then charging in without a clear strategy could make things worse. "What do you think I should do?" I asked, genuinely seeking guidance from someone whose judgment I trusted implicitly. Maya considered the question carefully. "I think you need more information before you do anything. You need to understand exactly what Lauren has been telling people, what your parents actually know about this situation, and whether there's any truth to the claim that your grandmother's will has been changed." The logical approach made sense, but every fiber of my being wanted to drive straight to Pacific Vista and demand answers from Grandmother Vivian. The uncertainty was eating at me, the not knowing whether the woman who had been such a positive influence in my life had truly lost faith in me. As we sat in the cafe, surrounded by the gentle hum of conversation and the comforting aroma of freshly ground coffee, I realized that this moment represented a turning point. Whatever the truth about Grandmother Vivian's will, whatever Lauren's motivations for spreading these rumors, my response to this crisis would define not only my relationship with my family, but my understanding of myself and my values. The woman who walked out of Serenity Café that afternoon would need to be stronger, wiser, and more strategic than the one who had walked in expecting nothing more challenging than catching up with her best friend over coffee. Because I was about to discover that family loyalty, personal integrity, and the courage to fight for what's right sometimes require more strength than I ever imagined I possessed. The drive from Serenity Café to my loft felt like navigating through a fog of disbelief and growing determination. Every traffic light seemed to mock me with its red glare, forcing me to sit still when every instinct screamed for action. By the time I pulled into my parking space behind the converted warehouse that housed my home and office, I had made a decision that would have surprised the woman who had walked into that cafe just 2 hours earlier. I wasn't going to run to Grandmother Vivian's house in a panic. I wasn't going to confront Lauren in an emotional outburst that would only feed into whatever narrative she was trying to create. Instead, I was going to do what I did best: research, investigate, and build a case based on facts rather than emotions. Elena was waiting for me in the loft, spread across our vintage leather couch with legal briefs scattered around her like fallen leaves. Her dark hair was pulled back in the messy bun that meant she was deep in concentration, and her reading glasses were perched on the end of her nose. She looked up as I entered, and her expression immediately shifted from focused concentration to concern. "You look like someone just told you the ocean is drying up," she said, setting aside the brief she'd been reviewing. "What happened at coffee with Maya?" I dropped onto the couch beside her, suddenly feeling the weight of the afternoon's revelations settling into my bones. Elena had a way of reading my moods that was both comforting and occasionally unnerving. 3 years together had given her an almost supernatural ability to sense when my carefully controlled exterior was hiding inner turmoil. My sister has apparently been telling half of Monterey that I've been cut out of Grandmother Vivian's will, I said, watching Elena's eyebrows shoot up in surprise. According to Lauren's version of events, our grandmother was so disgusted by my lifestyle choices that she had her attorney rewrite everything to exclude me entirely. Elena's reaction was immediate and fierce. She swung her legs off the couch and turned to face me fully, her brown eyes flashing with indignation. That's absolute nonsense, and you know it. Your grandmother adores you. She asks about your work every time we see her, and she's never been anything but welcoming to me. The certainty in Elena's voice was like a lifeline in churning water. Sometimes it took an outsider's perspective to remind you of truths that family drama could obscure. But even as I felt grateful for her support, I knew that Elena's observations, while accurate, wouldn't be enough to combat whatever systematic campaign Lauren might have been waging. The problem is, I continued, if Lauren has been working on this for months, if she's been carefully planting seeds of doubt about my choices and my priorities, then my grandmother might have been influenced by things I'm not even aware of. Elena stood up and began pacing, a habit she'd developed during law school that emerged whenever she was processing complex information. Okay, let's approach this like we would any other challenge. What do we actually know versus what we're assuming? What evidence exists, and what's just speculation designed to manipulate your emotions? This was why I loved Elena. Where others might offer sympathy or emotional support, she offered strategy and clear thinking. Her legal training had taught her to separate facts from feelings, to build cases on evidence rather than assumptions. It was exactly the kind of analytical approach this situation required. Here's what I know for certain, I said, starting to organize my thoughts. Lauren has been visiting Grandmother Vivian more frequently over the past several months. She's been asking detailed questions about Grandmother's schedule, her legal appointments, and her daily routine. She's made several comments about how difficult it must be for older people to understand modern family structures. Elena stopped pacing and fixed me with a sharp look. That sounds like she's been conducting reconnaissance, gathering information about your grandmother's vulnerabilities and daily routine. In legal terms, we'd call that preparation for undue influence. The phrase sent a chill through me. Undue influence suggested something far more calculated and sinister than simple sibling rivalry, or even garden-variety jealousy. It implied a systematic effort to manipulate an elderly person's decision-making process. But here's what I don't understand, I continued. Why now? Lauren has always been the favored child, the one who seemed to have everything handed to her. Why would she suddenly feel the need to actively work against me? Elena resumed her pacing, her legal mind clearly working through possibilities. Maybe things aren't as perfect in Lauren's world as they appear. Financial pressure can make people desperate, and desperate people sometimes do things they never would have considered otherwise. The observation hit home with uncomfortable accuracy. I had always assumed that Lauren and Marcus's lifestyle was supported by his substantial banking salary, but Elena's comment made me realize I had never actually examined their financial situation closely. The constant luxury, the expensive vacations, the private schools, the designer everything. What if it was all built on a foundation that was less stable than it appeared? I need to understand what's really going on, I said, feeling a sense of purpose beginning to crystallize. Not just with Grandmother Vivian's will, but with Lauren's motivation for spreading these rumors in the first place. Elena sat back down beside me, her expression serious but supportive. What's your plan? I'm going to start by talking to David, I said. If Lauren has been manipulating family dynamics, he would have noticed. He might not say anything directly. You know how he avoids conflict, but he picks up on everything that happens in our family ecosystem. Good starting point, Elena agreed. He's neutral, observant, and he doesn't have any obvious stake in inheritance politics. What else? I need to understand the legal framework around Grandmother Vivian's estate planning. Who is her attorney? When was the will last updated? Are there any documents or communications that would indicate whether changes have actually been made? Elena's expression grew thoughtful. That's trickier territory. Estate planning documents are confidential, and you can't just demand to see them without proper legal standing. But there might be indirect ways to gather information. Such as? Well, if your grandmother has been meeting with her attorney frequently, there might be a paper trail. Calendar appointments, billing records, communication patterns. Also, any major changes to an estate plan typically require witnesses and notarization. Those processes leave documentation. The lawyer in Elena was emerging, and I found myself feeling grateful for her analytical approach to what could easily have become an emotional spiral. How would I access that kind of information without overstepping legal boundaries? Carefully, Elena said with a slight smile. But legitimately. You could start by having an honest conversation with your grandmother about estate planning. In general. Not accusatory, not defensive, just expressing interest in understanding her wishes and ensuring that her legacy is protected according to her values. It was a sophisticated approach, one that honored both my grandmother's autonomy and my own need for clarity. Instead of charging in with accusations or defensive demands, I could approach the situation as a concerned granddaughter who wanted to ensure that her grandmother's wishes were being respected and protected. There's something else I need to consider, I said, thinking through the broader implications. If Lauren is spreading these rumors publicly, she's essentially forcing a confrontation. She's betting that I'll either accept the narrative she's created or that I'll react in a way that makes me look unstable or grasping. Elena nodded approvingly. Exactly. So your response needs to be measured, dignified, and focused on facts rather than emotions. You need to take control of the narrative without appearing to be defensive or desperate. How do I do that? By being proactive rather than reactive, Elena said. Instead of defending yourself against Lauren's accusations, you focus on demonstrating your positive relationship with your grandmother and your genuine concern for her well-being. You document everything, you build relationships with people who can speak to your character, and you ensure that your grandmother has access to independent advice if she needs it. The strategy was beginning to take shape in my mind. Instead of allowing Lauren's rumors to define the conversation, I could redirect the focus toward what really mattered, ensuring that Grandmother Vivian's wishes were respected and that she wasn't being manipulated or pressured by anyone. I'm going to call David, I decided, reaching for my phone. He gets off work at the aquarium around 5, and he usually walks the shoreline for an hour before heading home. If I catch him during his walk, he'll be relaxed and more likely to share what he's observed. Elena squeezed my hand encouragingly. Good plan. While you're doing that, I'll do some research on estate planning law in California, particularly around issues of undue influence and coercion. If this situation escalates, you'll want to understand your options. David answered on the third ring, and I could hear the sound of waves in the background, confirming that he was indeed on his evening beach walk. My brother had always been a creature of habit, finding comfort in routines that connected him to the natural world he studied and loved. Sophia! This is a nice surprise. I was just watching a group of sea otters that have taken up residence near the old pier. Did you know that otters can use tools? They keep their favorite rocks in their armpit pouches and… David, I interrupted. Gently. I need to ask you something serious about our family. The tone of my voice must have conveyed the gravity of the situation, because David's enthusiastic otter commentary stopped immediately. What's wrong? Have you noticed anything unusual about Lauren's behavior lately? Specifically regarding her relationship with Grandmother Vivian? There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of waves and seagulls. David was processing, something he always did carefully and thoroughly before responding to complex questions. You mean the way she's been positioning herself as grandmother's primary caregiver and social coordinator? He finally said. Yeah, I've noticed. It started around 6 months ago, right after grandmother had that fall in her garden. This was news to me. What fall? Nobody told me about any fall. It wasn't serious, David said quickly. She just tripped over a garden hose and scraped her knee. But Lauren treated it like a major medical emergency. She insisted on driving grandmother to the emergency room, even though the injury was clearly minor. Then she used it as justification for checking on grandmother more frequently. A picture was beginning to emerge of Lauren systematically inserting herself into our grandmother's daily life under the guise of concern and care. What kind of checking? Daily phone calls, twice-weekly visits, organizing all her social activities. Lauren convinced grandmother to let her coordinate the household staff, manage her calendar, even screen her phone calls to protect her from unnecessary stress. The scope of Lauren's involvement was far more extensive than I had realized. Did this concern you? David was quiet for another long moment. Honestly, yes. But you know how I am with family conflict. I told myself that maybe Lauren was genuinely trying to be helpful, that maybe I was being paranoid. But there were things that didn't sit right with me. Such as? Well, grandmother used to call me every Sunday evening to discuss my research and catch up on the week. Those calls stopped about 3 months ago. When I asked her about it, she said Lauren had suggested that too many phone calls were overwhelming for someone her age. My heart sank. Those Sunday calls between David and grandmother Vivian had been a tradition for years. She genuinely enjoyed hearing about his work and often provided insights that surprised even seasoned marine biologists with their depth and relevance. There's more, David continued. I tried to visit 2 weeks ago, just a spontaneous drop-by like I used to do. But when I arrived, Lauren was there, and she made it clear that unscheduled visits were no longer welcome. She said grandmother needed to maintain a consistent routine and that surprise visits could be disruptive to her health. The pattern was becoming unmistakable. Lauren had systematically isolated our grandmother from independent contact with other family members, positioning herself as the sole gatekeeper for access and information. It was a classic technique for exerting undue influence over an elderly person. David, I need to tell you something Lauren has been saying about me, I said, and proceeded to share Maya's revelations about the disinheritance rumors. When I finished, David let out a long, low whistle. That explains a lot, actually. I've been wondering why Lauren keeps asking me questions about your relationship with Elena, your career choices, your financial situation. She's been fishing for information she could use to build a case against you. What kind of questions? Things like whether I thought you were serious about Elena or just going through a phase, whether your business was actually profitable, or if you were struggling financially, whether I thought you were committed to staying in California, or if you might move away for better opportunities. Each question Lauren had asked David revealed a calculated effort to gather ammunition for undermining my relationship with our grandmother. She had been conducting what amounted to opposition research, looking for any information that could be used to paint me as unstable, uncommitted, or unsuitable as an heir. I should have said something sooner, David said, his voice heavy with regret. I kept telling myself it was just Lauren being Lauren, that she was probably just curious. But looking back, it feels like she was building a file on you. You couldn't have known, I assured him, though inside I was reeling from the sophistication of Lauren's strategy. The important thing now is figuring out how to protect grandmother Vivian and ensure she's making decisions based on accurate information rather than manipulation. What do you need me to do? David asked, and the immediate willingness to help, despite his natural aversion to family conflict, reminded me why I had always felt closest to this brother who preferred sea creatures to human drama. I need you to help me reestablish normal contact with grandmother Vivian, I said. Not in a way that creates confrontation with Lauren, but in a way that ensures she has access to independent perspectives and information. I can do that, David said, Maybe it's time I resume those Sunday phone calls, regardless of what Lauren thinks about overwhelming elderly people with too much family contact. As I ended the call with David and shared the conversation with Elena, I felt a shift in my understanding of the situation. This wasn't simply about sibling rivalry or even inheritance greed. This was about someone systematically manipulating an elderly family member's relationships and decision-making processes for personal gain. But it was also about something deeper: the power of truth over manipulation, the importance of family bonds that couldn't be broken by calculated schemes, and the strength that comes from facing challenges with integrity rather than desperation. The woman who had started this day worrying about coffee shop gossip was ending it with a clear mission: to protect someone she loved while upholding the values that had shaped her into the person she'd become. And tomorrow, the real work would begin. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that only comes after Pacific storms, when the air seems washed clean and every detail of the coastline stands out in sharp relief. I woke before dawn, my mind already racing with the strategic plan Elena and I had refined late into the previous evening. Today would mark the beginning of what I privately called Operation Truth, a systematic effort to understand and address Lauren's manipulation while protecting grandmother Vivian's autonomy. My first stop was the Monterey Bay Aquarium's research library, where I had arranged to meet Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the institution's director of community outreach and one of grandmother Vivian's oldest friends. Patricia had worked closely with our family's environmental initiatives for over 2 decades, and her perspective would be invaluable in understanding any recent changes in my grandmother's behavior or decision-making patterns. The research library occupied a quiet corner of the aquarium complex, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered spectacular views of Monterey Bay. Patricia was waiting for me at a corner table, her silver hair catching the morning light, as she reviewed what appeared to be grant applications. At 72, she remained sharp, energetic, and utterly committed to marine conservation, qualities that had made her both a trusted colleague and a cherished friend to grandmother Vivian. "Sophia," she greeted me warmly, rising to embrace me with the kind of genuine affection that immediately put me at ease. "It's been too long. I was just reviewing the applications for the Vivian Chen Martinez Marine Conservation Scholarship. Your grandmother's generosity continues to inspire the next generation of ocean advocates." The mention of the scholarship fund reminded me of one of the many reasons I admired my grandmother. She had established the program 5 years earlier, providing full funding for graduate students pursuing research in sustainable marine ecosystems. The recipients were chosen not just for academic excellence, but for their commitment to community engagement and environmental justice, values that reflected grandmother Vivian's belief that knowledge should serve the greater good. "Actually,
Patricia, I wanted to talk with you about grandmother Vivian," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "I'm concerned about some recent changes in her social patterns, and I was hoping you might have observed something that could help."
me understand what's happening." Patricia's expression grew thoughtful, and she set aside the grant applications to give me her full attention. "I have noticed some changes, actually. Changes that have been troubling me, though I wasn't sure how to address them with your family." "What kind of changes?" "Well, for the past 15 years, your grandmother and I have had lunch together every third Thursday of the month. We discuss the scholarship program, share updates about current research projects, and generally catch up on life. It's been one of the most consistent and enjoyable relationships in my professional life." Patricia paused, choosing her words carefully. "About 4 months ago, these lunches began to be interrupted. Your sister Lauren started joining us, initially saying she was concerned about your grandmother driving alone or navigating busy restaurants. At first, Vivian seemed pleased to include Lauren, introducing her as someone interested in learning more about marine conservation. I could already sense where this story was heading, but I remained silent, allowing Patricia to share her observations without interruption. "However," Patricia continued, "Lauren's presence gradually changed the entire dynamic of our conversations, Instead of discussing research or conservation initiatives, Lauren would steer the conversation toward family matters, specifically concerns about various family members' life choices and their impact on family stability. The pattern was becoming depressingly familiar. Lauren had systematically inserted herself into another of my grandmother's important relationships, then used that access to influence conversations and perspectives. "Did she mention me specifically?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Patricia nodded reluctantly. "She expressed what she characterized as loving concern about your relationship with Elena, suggesting that your grandmother might not fully understand the implications of your lifestyle choices. She also raised questions about your business, implying that your work took you away from family obligations and that your financial independence might make you less appreciative of family support." Each revelation felt like another piece of evidence in a case that was becoming increasingly clear. Lauren hadn't just been spreading rumors. She had been conducting a sophisticated influence campaign designed to gradually shift our grandmother's perception of me from proud approval to concerned disappointment. "How did my grandmother respond to these conversations?" I asked. "That's what troubled me most," Patricia admitted. "Initially, Vivian defended you strongly. She spoke with great pride about your work, your commitment to environmental sustainability, and your relationship with Elena. But over time, I noticed her becoming less certain, more willing to express doubts about whether she truly understood your priorities and values. The image of my confident, decisive grandmother being gradually worn down by Lauren's persistent manipulation made me feel sick with anger and sadness. Grandmother Vivian had always been someone who formed her own opinions based on direct observation and personal experience. The idea that she was being influenced to doubt her own perceptions felt like a profound violation of her autonomy. "Patricia, I need to ask you something important," I said. "In your opinion, based on your long relationship with my grandmother, do you believe she's making independent decisions about her relationships and her estate planning?" Patricia was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the bay where sea otters floated peacefully among the kelp beds. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of careful consideration. "I believe your grandmother is trying to make independent decisions, but I'm concerned that she's not receiving independent information upon which to base those decisions. When someone controls access to an elderly person's social contacts and consistently presents biased information, even the strongest mind can be influenced over time." The validation of my concerns was both relieving and terrifying. If Patricia, with her decades of experience and professional objectivity, was worried about undue influence, then my fears were justified. But it also meant that the situation was potentially more serious than I had initially realized. "What would you recommend?" I asked. "I think your grandmother needs to be reminded of her own values and judgment," Patricia said firmly. "She needs opportunities to interact with people who knew her before this influence campaign began. People who can reflect back to her the wisdom and strength that have always defined her character. How do I make that happen without creating family conflict that could backfire?" Patricia smiled, and for the first time that morning, her expression held a note of optimism. "Actually, I have an idea that might help. Next month marks the 20th anniversary of the Vivian Chen Martinez Marine Conservation Scholarship. I've been planning a small celebration to honor your grandmother's contributions to marine research. What if we expanded that celebration to include more of her longtime friends and colleagues? It would be a natural way to reconnect her with people who represent her core values and achievements." The suggestion was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of confronting Lauren's influence directly, we could surround Grandmother Vivian with people who embodied the values and relationships that had shaped her life. The celebration would provide natural opportunities for meaningful conversations that weren't filtered through Lauren's interpretation. "I love that idea," I said enthusiastically. "What can I do to help make it happen?" Well, you could certainly help with the planning and coordination. Your event management skills from your consulting work would be invaluable. But more importantly, your presence and participation would remind your grandmother of the granddaughter she's always been proud of, rather than the version Lauren has been presenting. As I left the aquarium, I felt energized by the concrete steps we had identified to address the situation. But I also knew that planning an anniversary celebration would take time, and I needed more immediate ways to reestablish authentic contact with my grandmother. My next stop was the Chen Martinez Maritime Solutions headquarters, where I hoped to speak with my father about the situation. The company occupied a modern building overlooking Monterey Harbor, with large windows that provided natural light for the engineers and designers who developed innovative marine technology. I had always loved visiting the office as a child, fascinated by the technical drawings and scale models that represented solutions to complex maritime challenges. I found my father in his office, reviewing blueprints for what appeared to be a new type of underwater sensor array. Dr. James Martinez had aged gracefully into his 60s, his dark hair now streaked with silver, but his eyes still sharp with the curiosity that had driven his career in marine veterinary medicine before. He joined the family business. "Sophia," he said, looking up with genuine pleasure. "What brings you to the office? Are you finally ready to put your sustainability expertise to work for the family business?" It was a running joke between us. My father had been encouraging me to consider joining Chen Martinez Maritime Solutions for years, recognizing that my background in sustainable business development could help the company expand its environmental initiatives. I had always resisted, preferring the independence of my consulting practice, but his invitation was offered with warmth rather than pressure. "Actually, Dad, I wanted to talk with you about something more personal," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I'm concerned about some rumors that Lauren has been spreading about me and Grandmother Vivian." My father's expression grew serious, and he set aside the blueprints to give me his full attention. "What kind of rumors?" I shared Maya's revelations about Lauren's claims regarding my supposed disinheritance, watching my father's face carefully for his reaction. As I spoke, I saw surprise, confusion, and growing concern cross his features. "Sophia, I can tell you with absolute certainty that your grandmother has never expressed any intention to disinherit you," my father said firmly. "In fact, quite the opposite. She speaks about you with tremendous pride and admiration." The relief I felt was profound, but it also raised new questions. Then why would Lauren tell people something so specific and damaging? My father leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. "I'm not sure, but I have been concerned about some of Lauren's recent behavior. She's been asking a lot of questions about the family business, about your grandmother's investments, about estate planning in general. I assumed she was just being more responsible about family matters as she got older." "What kind of questions?" "Things like how the business succession plan works, whether your grandmother's personal estate is separate from the company assets. What happens to family properties if someone dies without clear instructions?" At first, I thought it showed maturity and forward thinking, but now, in light of what you're telling me, it feels more calculating. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Lauren hadn't just been working to undermine my relationship with our grandmother. She had been conducting comprehensive research into the family's financial structure and estate planning arrangements. "Dad, have you or Mom had any conversations with Grandmother Vivian about changing her will or expressing concerns about my lifestyle?" My father shook his head decisively. "Never. Your mother and I have always believed that your grandmother is perfectly capable of making her own decisions about her estate. We've never offered opinions about who should or shouldn't inherit what, and we've certainly never suggested that any of our children were unsuitable heirs." The confirmation that my parents weren't complicit in Lauren's scheme was enormously relieving, but it also meant that Lauren had been lying about their support for her narrative. "I think Lauren may be in financial trouble," my father said suddenly. Marcus mentioned something at the last family gathering about restructuring some investments and reducing overhead expenses. I didn't think much of it at the time, but coupled with Lauren's sudden interest in family finances. The suggestion that financial desperation might be driving Lauren's behavior added a layer of complexity to the situation. If she and Marcus were struggling financially, it would explain the urgency and calculation behind her manipulation campaign. "What should I do, Dad?" I asked, grateful for the opportunity to seek guidance from someone whose judgment I trusted. "I think you should talk to your grandmother directly," he said. "Not defensively, not confrontationally, but honestly. Tell her you love her and want to understand her wishes. Ask her directly whether she has concerns about your life choices that you should address." The advice was simple but profound. Instead of trying to counter Lauren's manipulation indirectly, I could address it head-on by creating space for honest communication between my grandmother and me. "There's something else," my father added. "Your grandmother has always valued directness and honesty above everything else. If someone has been manipulating her or providing her with false information, she would want to know about it. But she would want proof, not just accusations." "What kind of proof?" "Documentation, witnesses, specific examples of manipulation or deception. Your grandmother thinks like the businesswoman she's always been. She wants facts, not emotions." As I left my father's office, I felt clearer about my next steps, but also more aware of the challenges ahead. Confronting Lauren's manipulation would require more than good intentions. It would require the kind of systematic, evidence-based approach that my grandmother would respect and trust. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "How did the meetings go? Ready for Phase 2 of Operation Truth?" Phase 2, as we had discussed, the night before, involved creating opportunities for direct, unmediated contact with Grandmother Vivian. Elena had researched California estate planning law and discovered that elderly people had specific legal protections against undue influence, including the right to independent legal counsel and confidential communication with family members. But more importantly, Phase 2 was about remembering why this fight mattered. It wasn't just about inheritance or family politics. It was about protecting someone I loved from manipulation and ensuring that her legacy reflected her true values, rather than someone else's distorted interpretation of them. The late afternoon sun was painting Monterey Bay in shades of gold and turquoise as I drove toward Pacific Vista, my grandmother's estate. I hadn't called ahead, deliberately choosing to arrive during the time when Lauren would be picking up her daughters from their various after-school activities. This would give me the best chance of having an uninterrupted conversation with Grandmother Vivian. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I saw my grandmother working in her garden, carefully tending to the native plants she had cultivated over decades. At 86, she still moved with purpose and grace, her silver hair elegantly arranged and her clothes practical but stylish. She looked up as I approached, and her face broke into the warm smile that had been brightening my days since childhood. "Sophia, what a wonderful surprise," she said, pulling off her gardening gloves to embrace me. "I was just thinking about you this morning when I saw an article about sustainable coastal development in the Chronicle. The work you're doing is so important." Standing there in her garden, surrounded by the flowers and herbs she had nurtured, with such care, I felt the full weight of what was at stake. This wasn't just about money or wills or family drama. It was about preserving the relationship between a grandmother and granddaughter who genuinely loved and respected each other, despite whatever forces might be working to drive them apart. The conversation that followed would determine not just my future, but the future of truth itself in our family. The afternoon light filtering through Grandmother Vivian's garden created an almost ethereal atmosphere as we settled onto the stone bench she had installed beside her prized orchid collection. The bench faced west toward the Pacific, offering an unobstructed view of the horizon where fishing boats moved like distant toys against the vast blue canvas. This had always been our special place for serious conversations, where she had shared stories of building the business with my grandfather, and where I had confided my dreams of creating positive environmental change. "Tell me about your latest project," Grandmother Vivian said, her eyes bright with genuine interest. "I heard from Patricia Hendricks that you're working with the Humboldt County communities on sustainable tourism initiatives. That sounds exactly like the kind of work that can create lasting positive change." Her enthusiasm was immediate and authentic, so different from the concerned disapproval that Lauren had supposedly been reporting. I felt a surge of hope mixed with determination. Whatever influence campaign Lauren had been conducting, it clearly hadn't completely eroded the foundation of pride and support that had always characterized my relationship with my grandmother. "It's been incredibly rewarding," I said, settling into the comfortable rhythm of sharing my work with someone who truly understood its importance. "We're helping coastal communities develop tourism models that showcase their natural beauty while protecting the ecosystems that make them special in the first place. The key is finding ways for economic growth and environmental conservation to support each other rather than compete." Grandmother Vivian nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of thinking your grandfather would have admired. He always believed that the most successful business strategies were the ones that created value for everyone involved: the company, the community, and the environment. Short-term thinking might generate quick profits, but sustainable success requires a longer view." The conversation felt natural and unforced, reminding me of hundreds of similar discussions we had shared over the years. But I knew I needed to address the elephant in the garden: the rumors Lauren had been spreading and the concerns she claimed our grandmother harbored about my life choices. "Grandmother," I said carefully, "I've heard some troubling things recently, and I wanted to talk with you directly about them. Someone has been suggesting that you have concerns about my life choices, particularly my relationship with Elena and my career path. I wanted to give you the opportunity to share any worries you might have, so we can address them honestly." My grandmother's expression shifted from pleasant interest to sharp attention, her business instincts clearly engaged. She had built a successful company by reading people accurately and addressing problems directly, and those skills hadn't diminished with age. "Sophia, who has been telling you that I have concerns about your choices?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of steel that I recognized from childhood, the tone she used when someone had misrepresented facts or tried to manipulate a situation. "I'd rather not create family drama by naming names," I said diplomatically, "but I wanted to make sure you felt comfortable sharing any actual concerns you might have about my life or my relationship with Elena." Grandmother Vivian was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the ocean horizon as she processed my words. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the kind of authority that had commanded respect in boardrooms for decades. "Sophia, I want you to listen to me very carefully," she said, turning to face me directly. "I have never, not once, expressed concerns about your relationship with Elena. I think she's a remarkable young woman who shares your values and supports your ambitions. Any suggestion that I disapprove of your partnership is completely false." The relief that flooded through me was so intense it was almost overwhelming, but my grandmother wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she continued, "I have never questioned your career choices or suggested that your work takes you away from family obligations. I am tremendously proud of the business you've built and the positive impact you're creating. Anyone who suggests otherwise is either deeply mistaken or deliberately misrepresenting my views." The steel in her voice had grown harder, and I realized that my grandmother's sharp mind had already begun connecting dots that I hadn't explicitly drawn for her. "I think someone has been systematically misrepresenting my opinions and concerns," she said, her business acumen clearly engaged. "The question is why and what they hope to accomplish by creating false divisions in our family." This was the opening I had hoped for, an opportunity to share my concerns without appearing to attack Lauren directly. "I've been wondering the same thing," I said. It seems like someone might be trying to manipulate family relationships for reasons that aren't entirely clear. Grandmother Vivian stood up from the bench and began pacing slowly along the garden path, a habit I recognized from watching her work through complex business problems. Her mind was clearly racing through possibilities and implications. "Sophia, I need to ask you something directly," she said, stopping to fix me with an intense gaze. "Do you believe that someone in our family has been deliberately trying to undermine your relationship with me?" The moment of truth had arrived. I could deflect, minimize, or try to protect family harmony by avoiding difficult accusations. Or I could trust in the strength of my relationship with my grandmother and the power of honest communication to overcome manipulation and deception. "Yes," I said simply. "I believe someone has been working systematically to convince you that I don't share your values or respect your legacy. And I think they've been doing it by controlling access to information and interpreting your relationships for you, rather than allowing you to form your own opinions." My grandmother's expression grew thoughtful rather than angry, and I realized she was approaching this revelation the same way she would approach any other business problem, by gathering information, analyzing patterns, and developing a strategic response. "Tell me specifically what you've observed," she said, settling back onto the bench. "I want facts, not assumptions or emotional reactions." Over the next 30 minutes, I shared everything I had learned. Maya's report about Lauren's public statements, David's observations about restricted access and controlled communication, Patricia's concerns about the changing dynamics of their monthly lunches, and my father's confirmation that my parents had never expressed concerns about my suitability as an heir. Throughout my account, Grandmother Vivian listened with the focused attention of someone accustomed to processing complex information and identifying patterns. She asked clarifying questions, requested specific examples, and occasionally made notes on a small pad she kept in her gardening apron. When I finished, she was quiet for several minutes, her gaze once again fixed on the ocean horizon. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that reflected off the calm surface of the bay. "I need to tell you something that I probably should have recognized sooner," she finally said. "Over the past several months, I have noticed changes in how information reaches me and how my relationships with various family members have been managed. I attributed it to Lauren's genuine concern for my well-being, but your account suggests a different interpretation." She turned to face me directly, her expression both sad and determined. No one should have to defend their character against false accusations within their own family. But more importantly, no one should be manipulated into doubting relationships and values that have been central to their life. "What do you think we should do?" I asked, grateful to be having this conversation as allies rather than across a divide created by manipulation and misinformation. "First," Grandmother Vivian said firmly, "I need to review my estate planning documents to ensure they accurately reflect my current wishes, rather than anyone else's interpretation of what those wishes should be. Second, I need to reestablish direct communication with all of my grandchildren without anyone serving as an intermediary or filter." She paused, and a slight smile crossed her face. "And third, I think it's time for some people in this family to learn that wisdom and experience don't make someone easy to manipulate. Quite the opposite, actually." As if summoned by our conversation, the sound of car doors slamming announced Lauren's arrival. Through the garden gates, I could see her distinctive luxury SUV in the driveway, and I heard her voice calling out as she entered the house. "Perfect timing," Grandmother Vivian murmured. "Sophia, I want you to stay for dinner. I think it's time for a family conversation that includes everyone, with all cards on the table." The prospect of confronting Lauren directly, especially with Grandmother Vivian's support, was both exciting and terrifying. But I knew this moment had been inevitable since Maya first shared those shocking rumors. The only question was whether I would face it with fear or with the confidence that comes from standing on solid ground. "Grandmother? Are you in the garden?" Lauren's voice carried across the courtyard, sweet and concerned in the way that had probably fooled everyone who wasn't looking for patterns of manipulation. "We're here, Lauren," Grandmother Vivian called back, her voice carrying a note of authority that hadn't been there earlier in our conversation. "Please join us, and call David and your parents. I'd like everyone to come for dinner tonight." As Lauren appeared in the garden entrance, her expression shifting from pleasant expectation to surprise and then concern when she saw me, I felt a surge of strength that came from finally standing in the light of truth, rather than the shadows of rumor and manipulation. "Oh," Lauren said, her voice carefully modulated to hide whatever she was actually feeling. "Sophia, I didn't know you were visiting. How nice that you could find time in your busy schedule to see grandmother." The subtle criticism embedded in her greeting, the implication that I didn't visit frequently enough, was exactly the kind of manipulation I now recognized as Lauren's signature technique. But instead of feeling defensive, I felt empowered by my grandmother's presence and support. "I always have time for family," I replied evenly. "In fact, Grandmother and I were just discussing how important it is to maintain direct, honest communication with the people we love." Lauren's eyes flickered between my grandmother and me, clearly trying to assess what had been discussed and how much her carefully constructed narrative might have been challenged. "Of course," she said, settling onto a nearby garden chair, with the kind of graceful composure that had probably served her well in social situations throughout her life. "Family communication is so important. Sometimes, though, it's necessary to protect people we love from unnecessary stress or concern." "What kind of stress or concern?" Grandmother Vivian asked, her voice carrying an edge that Lauren clearly hadn't expected. "Well," Lauren said, glancing at me nervously, "you know how difficult it can be when family members make choices that don't align with traditional values. Sometimes it's kinder to handle those situations delicately rather than forcing uncomfortable conversations." It was a masterful deflection, managing to criticize my choices while positioning herself as protecting our grandmother from difficult discussions. But I could see from my grandmother's expression that the manipulation attempt was falling flat. "Lauren," Grandmother Vivian said calmly, "I'd like you to give me some specific examples of the choices Sophia has made that you consider problematic. And I'd like you to explain why you believe I need protection from discussing those choices directly with her." The direct challenge clearly caught Lauren off guard. She had probably grown accustomed to having her interpretations and concerns accepted without question, particularly when they were framed as protective care for an elderly family member. Well, it's not that her choices are problematic exactly," Lauren stammered. "It's just that different generations sometimes have different perspectives on lifestyle decisions, and I thought it might be easier for everyone if potential conflicts were avoided." "What potential conflicts?" I asked, finding my voice and my strength. "Are you referring to my relationship with Elena? My career focus on environmental sustainability? My choice to live independently rather than conforming to someone else's expectations about how women should structure their lives?" Lauren's composure was beginning to crack under the pressure of having to defend her manipulations directly rather than operating through innuendo and interpretation. "I never said there was anything wrong with your choices," she said defensively. I was just concerned that grandmother might not fully understand the implications of certain lifestyle decisions, particularly regarding family legacy and traditional values. "Lauren," Grandmother Vivian said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that commanded immediate attention, "I need you to explain something to me. Why have you been telling people that I've had Sophia removed from my will? Because that's what you've been saying, and it's completely false." The silence that followed was profound. Lauren's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally a kind of desperate defiance. "I never said you had removed her from your will," Lauren protested. I may have expressed concerns about whether certain family members fully appreciated the responsibility that comes with inheriting significant assets, but I never claimed any specific actions had been taken. It was a lawyer-like distinction, technically accurate but morally dishonest. And from my grandmother's expression, I could see that she recognized the evasion for what it was. "Lauren," Grandmother Vivian said, standing up from the bench with the kind of decisive movement that signaled the end of a discussion, "I think we need to have a family meeting. Tonight. With everyone present. Because it's clear that some people have been operating under significant misunderstandings about my wishes, my values, and my relationships with my grandchildren." As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, painting the garden in increasingly dramatic shades of gold and crimson, I realized that this evening would mark a turning point, not just in my own life, but in our entire family's understanding of truth, manipulation, and the courage required to stand up for what's right. The woman who had started this journey worried about coffee shop gossip was ending this chapter prepared to fight for truth, family integrity, and the values that had shaped her into someone worthy of her grandmother's pride and trust. And tomorrow would bring revelations that none of us were prepared for. The emergency family meeting convened in Grandmother Vivian's formal dining room at 7 o'clock sharp, the mahogany table that had hosted decades of holiday celebrations, now serving as the venue for what would become the most consequential conversation in our family's history. The room felt charged with tension as everyone took their seats, my parents looking confused and concerned, David appearing uncomfortable but determined, Lauren maintaining her composed facade despite the obvious strain, and Marcus sitting beside his wife with the expression of someone who suspected he was about to learn things he'd rather not know. Grandmother Vivian had changed from her gardening clothes into a navy blue suit that reminded everyone present of her decades as a successful businesswoman. She carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to running board meetings and making decisions that affected hundreds of employees. This wasn't going to be a casual family discussion. This was going to be a formal presentation of facts followed by decisive action. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Grandmother Vivian began, her voice carrying the kind of crisp professionalism that had served her well in countless business negotiations. "I've called this meeting because it's come to my attention that there has been significant misinformation circulating about my estate planning decisions and my relationships with various family members." She paused to make eye contact with each person at the table, ensuring she had their complete attention, before continuing. "Specifically, rumors have been spread that I have concerns about Sophia's life choices and that I have taken steps to modify my will based on those supposed concerns. These rumors are completely false, and their circulation has created unnecessary division and pain in our family." My mother, Linda, looked genuinely shocked. "Vivian, who would spread such rumors? And why?" "That's exactly what we're here to determine," Grandmother Vivian replied. "But before we address the source of these false statements, I want to make my actual position absolutely clear to everyone in this room." She turned to face me directly, her expression warm but formal. "Sophia, I want everyone to hear me say this explicitly. I am tremendously proud of the woman you've become, the business you've built, and the relationship you've created with Elena. Your commitment to environmental sustainability aligns perfectly with the values your grandfather and I tried to instill in this family. Anyone suggesting that I disapprove of your choices is either mistaken or deliberately misrepresenting my views." The relief that washed over me was profound, but it was mixed with sadness for the weeks of uncertainty and family tension that could have been avoided if these false narratives had been challenged sooner. Furthermore, Grandmother Vivian continued, "I want to address the specific claim that I have removed Sophia from my will or modified my estate planning based on concerns about her lifestyle. This is categorically untrue. My estate planning reflects my values of rewarding hard work, environmental stewardship, and financial responsibility, qualities that Sophia embodies more than anyone else in this room." Lauren's face had gone pale, and I could see her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her water glass. Marcus looked confused and increasingly uncomfortable, clearly realizing that his wife had been involved in something he hadn't fully understood. "However," Grandmother Vivian said, her voice taking on a harder edge, "the circulation of these false rumors has made me realize that my current estate planning may not adequately reflect my true intentions or protect against the kind of manipulation and misinformation that has been occurring. Therefore, I have decided to revise my will to ensure it accurately represents my values and cannot be misinterpreted or manipulated by anyone with ulterior motives." The silence that followed was electric. Everyone was processing the implications of what they had just heard. But Lauren was clearly struggling with something much more immediate and terrifying than the rest of us. "Grandmother," Lauren said, her voice carefully controlled but betraying an undercurrent of desperation. "I think there may have been some misunderstandings about conversations we've had. Sometimes when people care deeply about family harmony, they might express concerns in ways that could be misinterpreted." It was a masterful attempt at damage control, acknowledging that she had expressed concerns while framing them as coming from a place of love rather than manipulation. But my grandmother's business instincts were too sharp to be deflected by elegant phrasing. "Lauren," Grandmother Vivian said, opening a leather portfolio that had been sitting on the table beside her place setting, "I've spent the afternoon making some phone calls to people who have been present during various conversations over the past few months. Would you like me to share what I learned?" The color drained completely from Lauren's face, and for the first time since I'd arrived, her composed facade cracked entirely. "I don't think that's necessary. I'm sure everyone here understands that family dynamics can be complicated, and sometimes, actually, I think it's very necessary," Grandmother Vivian interrupted firmly, "because what I learned suggests that this wasn't a matter of misunderstanding or family concern. This was a systematic campaign to manipulate my relationships and influence my decision-making." She pulled out a sheet of notes and adjusted her reading glasses. "Patricia Hendricks confirmed that during your visits to our monthly lunches, you consistently steered conversations away from topics Sophia and I typically discussed and toward concerns about her lifestyle choices. Dr. Harrison, my physician, confirmed that you specifically asked him about the relationship between stress and decision-making in elderly patients, particularly regarding complex family situations." Each revelation hit the table like a physical blow. My parents looked increasingly horrified as the scope of Lauren's manipulation became clear. David's expression had shifted from uncomfortable neutrality to open disgust. Even Marcus appeared to be seeing his wife's behavior in a new light. "Most concerning of all," Grandmother Vivian continued, "my attorney, Robert Kellman, confirmed that you made an appointment to discuss estate planning law, specifically asking about the grounds for challenging will provisions and the timeline for contesting estate distributions after someone's death." The final revelation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Lauren hadn't just been spreading rumors or trying to influence family relationships. She had been actively researching how to challenge my grandmother's estate planning decisions if they didn't align with her preferences. "Lauren," my father said, his voice heavy with disappointment and disbelief, "please tell me you weren't actually planning to contest your grandmother's will." Lauren's composure finally shattered completely. Tears began streaming down her face, but they seemed to be tears of fear and desperation rather than genuine remorse. "You don't understand the pressure we're under," she said, her voice breaking. "Marcus's company has been restructuring for months. His entire division might be eliminated. We're facing foreclosure on the house. The girls' school tuition is due. And we've already borrowed against everything we have." Marcus looked shocked by this public revelation of their financial situation. "Lauren, we agreed we would handle this privately, work with a financial advisor, maybe downsize." "Downsize? To what?" Lauren snapped, turning on her husband with years of suppressed frustration. A normal house in a normal neighborhood where the girls would have to change schools, and I'd have to explain to everyone why we couldn't maintain the lifestyle we've worked so hard to build? The raw honesty of her breakdown revealed the toxic mindset that had driven her manipulation campaign. For Lauren, the prospect of financial adjustment wasn't just about practical concerns. It was about social status, public perception, and maintaining an image that had become more important than integrity or family relationships. So you decided that manipulating an elderly family member and destroying your sister's reputation was preferable to facing financial reality? David asked, his quiet voice carrying more moral authority than any amount of shouting could have achieved. I wasn't destroying anyone's reputation, Lauren protested weakly. I was just trying to ensure that family resources went to family members who actually needed them and would use them to maintain family stability. By lying about grandmother's intentions and poisoning her relationships with other family members, I said, finding my voice despite the emotional turbulence of the evening, by systematically isolating her from independent sources of information and manipulating her social interactions to serve your financial agenda. Grandmother Vivian held up a hand to stop the escalating confrontation. The question now is not what Lauren did or why she did it. The question is how we move forward as a family in a way that honors truth, integrity, and genuine care for each other's well-being. She turned to address Lauren directly, her expression stern but not unkind. Lauren, your financial situation, while serious, does not justify manipulating family relationships or spreading false information about other family members. However, the fact that you felt desperate enough to resort to such tactics suggests that we as a family have failed to create an environment where people feel safe asking for help when they need it. The generosity of my grandmother's perspective, even in the face of calculated manipulation, reminded me why I had always admired her wisdom and grace. She was choosing to address the underlying problems rather than simply punishing the symptoms. Here's what's going to happen, Grandmother Vivian continued, her voice taking on the decisive tone of someone announcing business decisions. First, Lauren, you will publicly correct the false statements you've made about Sophia and about my estate planning decisions. You will do this at the next Monterey Peninsula Women's Charity Luncheon, and you will do it with the same specificity and detail that you used when spreading the original misinformation. Lauren nodded through her tears, clearly understanding that this was not a negotiation. Second, Grandmother Vivian continued, our family will work together to help you and Marcus address your financial situation in a sustainable way. But that help will be contingent on your commitment to honest communication and responsible financial management. No more pretending that unsustainable spending is somehow sustainable. No more borrowing against the future to maintain current appearances. She turned to address the entire table. Third, I am indeed revising my will, but not for the reasons Lauren tried to create. I'm revising it to ensure that it rewards the values I actually care about: environmental stewardship, financial responsibility, honest communication, and genuine service to others. The new will include specific provisions to protect against manipulation and will be structured to encourage positive behaviors rather than simply transferring wealth. The room was silent as everyone processed what they had heard. But I found myself thinking not about inheritance or family drama, but about the extraordinary example my grandmother was setting in how to respond to manipulation and crisis with wisdom rather than revenge. Grandmother, I said, I want you to know that whatever you decide about your estate planning, my relationship with you has never been about inheritance. It's been about learning from someone I admire and respect. Tonight has only reinforced why I've always been proud to be your granddaughter. Her smile in response was worth more than any amount of money could ever be. Sophia, that's exactly why you'll always be someone I'm proud to call family. Not because of what you might inherit, but because of who you've chosen to become. As the formal meeting concluded and family members began the complicated process of rebuilding relationships damaged by months of manipulation, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not just for the resolution of the immediate crisis, but for the reminder that truth, even when it's difficult to speak and painful to hear, is always stronger than deception. Lauren's manipulation campaign had failed not because I had fought against it, but because truth has a way of emerging when people have the courage to seek it and speak it. My grandmother's wisdom in handling the situation had transformed what could have been a family catastrophe into an opportunity for deeper understanding and stronger relationships. The woman who drove home that evening was different from the one who had received Maya's shocking news just days before. She was someone who had learned that family loyalty doesn't mean protecting people from the consequences of their actions. It means caring enough to insist on truth and growth. Someone who had discovered that the best way to honor the people we love is to live according to the values they've taught us, regardless of the challenges that arise. But the biggest revelations were still to come, because tomorrow would bring the reading of my grandmother's revised will, and what it contained would surprise everyone, including me. The morning of the will reading dawned with an unprecedented clarity that seemed to mirror the emotional breakthrough our family had experienced the night before. I woke in my loft to the sound of seagulls calling across Monterey Bay and the gentle rhythm of waves against the distant shore. For the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely peaceful. Not because I knew what the day would bring, but because I knew it would bring truth rather than manipulation. Elena had left early for a client meeting in San Francisco, but she'd left a note on my coffee maker that simply read, "Whatever happens today, remember that you've already won the most important battle. You chose integrity over convenience, truth over comfort. That's what real strength looks like. Love you." The note reminded me that regardless of what Grandmother Vivian's revised will contained, the real victory had been reclaiming honest communication and authentic relationships within our family. The inheritance, whatever it might be, was secondary to the restoration of trust and respect that had occurred during our confrontation with Lauren's manipulation. I arrived at Robert Kelman's law office 30 minutes early, choosing to walk through downtown Monterey rather than driving, using the time to center myself and prepare for whatever revelations awaited. The historic adobe buildings and tree-lined streets that had witnessed generations of California history seemed to whisper reminders about the importance of legacy. Not just financial legacy, but the legacy of values and relationships that define who we become. The law office occupied a beautifully restored Victorian house that had been converted into professional suites, with original hardwood floors and period fixtures that created an atmosphere of dignity and permanence. Robert Kelman himself was a distinguished man in his 70s who had served as our family's attorney for over 30 years, witnessing my grandparents' business growth and helping structure the legal frameworks that had protected their achievements. I was the first family member to arrive, and Robert greeted me with the kind of warm professionalism that had made him a trusted advisor to multiple generations of our family. "Sophia," he said, rising from behind an antique desk that seemed perfectly suited to the gravity of the occasion, "I want you to know that working with your grandmother on her estate planning revisions has been one of the most inspiring experiences of my legal career." She approached this process with remarkable clarity about her values and her hopes for your family's future. His words carried an undertone of anticipation that suggested the revised will contained elements that would surprise everyone present. But before I could ask for clarification, the rest of the family began arriving in a succession that felt almost ceremonial. David entered first, looking slightly uncomfortable in the formal suit he typically reserved for academic conferences and family weddings. His presence brought a sense of calm neutrality that I knew would be valuable regardless of what we were about to learn. My parents followed, my father wearing the serious expression he typically reserved for major business decisions, my mother carrying herself with the quiet dignity that had always characterized her approach to family challenges. Lauren and Marcus arrived last, and the change in Lauren's appearance was striking. Gone were the designer clothes and carefully styled hair that had been her signature. Instead, she wore a simple black dress and minimal makeup, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had seen her since childhood. Marcus's expression suggested a man who was still processing the revelations of the previous evening and trying to understand how his life had become so complicated. Grandmother Vivian made her entrance with the kind of theatrical timing that suggested she understood the significance of this moment for everyone present. At 86, she moved with purpose and authority, wearing an emerald green suit that had been one of my grandfather's favorites, and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had made decisions she was proud to stand behind. "Thank you all for being here," Robert began once everyone was seated around the conference table that dominated his office. "We're gathered today for the reading of the last will and testament of Vivian Chen Martinez, revised and executed yesterday afternoon in the presence of 3 witnesses and properly notarized according to California state law." The formal language created an atmosphere of solemnity that made even routine breathing seem loud in the quiet room. Everyone understood that whatever happened next would reshape our family's future in ways that extended far beyond financial considerations. "Before I begin reading the specific provisions," Robert continued, "Mrs. Chen Martinez has asked me to share a letter she wrote to explain the reasoning behind her decisions. She felt it was important for everyone to understand not just what she decided, but why she decided it." He opened an envelope and withdrew several pages of what I recognized as my grandmother's distinctive handwriting, bold, clear script that reflected her direct approach to communication. "My beloved family," Robert read in his measured, professional voice. "If you are hearing this letter, it means I have taken the step of revising my estate planning to better reflect my true values and my hopes for your futures. This decision was not made lightly or in response to recent family drama, but rather as the culmination of months of reflection about what kind of legacy I want to leave." The letter continued with observations about each family member that revealed the depth of my grandmother's understanding of our individual characters and challenges. She wrote about my father's dedication to marine conservation and his success in expanding the family business while maintaining its environmental principles. She praised my mother's contributions to environmental science and her role in establishing sustainable practices that had become industry standards. Her words about David were particularly touching. "David has chosen a path that prioritizes knowledge and environmental protection over financial gain, demonstrating the kind of principled decision-making that builds character and creates lasting positive change. His quiet integrity and genuine dedication to marine conservation embody the values his grandfather and I tried to instill in our family." When Robert reached the section about me, I felt my breath catch. Sophia has built a career that perfectly balances entrepreneurial success with environmental responsibility, creating positive change while maintaining financial independence. Her relationship with Elena demonstrates maturity and commitment, and her refusal to compromise her values for social acceptance shows the kind of strength that creates lasting happiness. The section about Lauren was more complex and revealed my grandmother's sophisticated understanding of human nature. Lauren possesses tremendous social intelligence and organizational abilities that could create significant positive impact if channeled toward sustainable goals rather than maintaining unsustainable appearances. Her recent actions, while deeply disappointing, have also revealed someone capable of change when faced with honest consequences for her choices. The letter concluded with an explanation of the revised will's structure. "I have structured my estate to reward the values and behaviors that I believe create genuine prosperity: environmental stewardship, financial responsibility, honest communication, and service to others. This is not about punishment or favoritism, but about using inherited wealth to encourage the kind of choices that build character and create positive change." Robert set aside the letter and opened the official will document. The estate of Vivian Chen Martinez, totaling approximately $42 million in liquid assets, real estate holdings, and investment portfolios, plus extensive art and jewelry collections, will be distributed according to the following provisions. The numbers alone were staggering, but the specific distribution formula was even more remarkable. Unlike traditional wills that simply divided assets among heirs, my grandmother had created a structure that linked inheritance to demonstrated values and continued commitment to positive change. To my son James Martinez and daughter-in-law Linda Chen Martinez, Robert read, I leave the family home at Pacific Vista, with the understanding that it will remain available for family gatherings and will eventually transition to the family member who demonstrates the greatest commitment to environmental conservation and community service. This provision clearly recognized my parents' role as family anchors, while creating incentives for the next generation to earn, rather than simply inherit the family's most significant asset. To my grandson David Martinez, Robert continued, I leave $5 million to establish the David Martinez Marine Conservation Research Foundation, with the stipulation that he serve as its director and use the funds to support graduate research in sustainable ocean management. Additionally, I leave him the family cabin at Big Sur, recognizing his deep connection to California's coastal environment. David's face showed a mixture of shock and deep emotion. The inheritance wasn't just generous. It was perfectly tailored to support his life's work while providing him with the security to pursue his research without financial constraints. To my granddaughter Lauren Cooper, Robert read, and I could feel the tension in the room spike. Dramatically, I leave $2 million to be distributed over 10 years contingent upon her completion of a financial management program and her demonstrated commitment to living within sustainable means. Additionally, I establish education funds of $100,000 each for her 3 daughters to be held in trust until they reach college age. Lauren's inheritance was substantial but structured in a way that addressed the financial irresponsibility that had led to her manipulation campaign. The 10-year distribution timeline would force her to develop sustainable financial habits while ensuring that her daughters' educational futures were protected. But it was the final provision that would shock everyone in the room, myself included. To my granddaughter Sophia Chen Martinez, Robert read, his voice carrying a note of anticipation that suggested he understood the significance of what he was about to announce. I leave the remainder of my estate, approximately $33 million, along with my complete art collection and jewelry, recognizing her demonstrated commitment to the values that built our family's success. However, this inheritance comes with a specific challenge designed to honor her entrepreneurial spirit and her commitment to environmental sustainability. The amount was overwhelming, but it was the mention of a challenge that truly captured my attention. My grandmother had never done anything conventionally, and apparently, her estate planning was no exception. Sophia's inheritance will be distributed in 3 phases, Robert continued. She will receive $10 million immediately to provide financial security and support her current business endeavors. An additional $10 million will be released when she establishes a nonprofit organization focused on environmental sustainability that achieves measurable positive impact within 3 years. The final $13 million will be distributed when she successfully mentors 3 other women entrepreneurs in building sustainable businesses that create both environmental benefit and financial success. The structure was brilliant in its complexity. Instead of simply inheriting wealth, I was being challenged to use that wealth as a foundation for creating even greater positive change. The inheritance wasn't an end goal. It was a beginning point for amplifying the work I was already doing and expanding its impact exponentially. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. The reading concluded with a final surprise that left everyone speechless and redefined everything we thought we understood about inheritance, family legacy, and the true meaning of wealth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.